going to the 10th annual, we think it's the 10th annual, past president of the Women's Political Committee Luncheon. Better? I know it's that high-pitched noise, but I will modulate. We're very glad to have you here. This is an organization, we are 23 years young, 23 years young, and started this organization to help get more women elected to office. When I say more, we used to hold on to the position of mayor in this community, and our past mayor and our current mayor are here today. But other than that, we found this to be a community where men ran every organization, men ran every department, men were the board of supervisors, men were every judge, and we decided we could do it at least as well. There you go, thank you, that was the line. You'll get the check in the mail. So, this is actually one of our larger events. I think it's in part because most of us in this room are mad as hell, and we are not going to take it anymore. We would really love for you to consider, if you aren't a member of the organization, we would love for you to join. There is power in numbers. This past November, we got all 15 of the people who had been endorsed by this organization. All 15 were elected to office. If that isn't power, this organization helped elect our congresswoman, who I'll introduce in a moment, our mayors. I was elected the first woman to the state assembly from this district, supervisors, members even of the Goleta Sanitary District. And if you don't think that's important, remember next time you flush your toilet. So this is a wonderful group of people. I'm going to start introducing folks now and talk a little bit more about it as we go along. At the moment, though, I want to introduce the past presidents. Now, here is your job. Because we don't want any of the past presidents to feel like they didn't buy enough tables or get enough applause. So, one clap for each past president as she stands up, and then at the end, we'll give a round of applause, okay? Do you think you can handle that? All right, there'll be detention for anybody who can't pay close attention to the rules. So let's start. Is Gail Binion here? All right, let's give her a clap anyway. Barbara Lindeman, Lois Phillips, Carol Pacero, Susan Rose, me, Margaret Connell, Colleen Schneider, Janet Barron, Melissa Hummer, Sharon Hoshida, Lisa Gurvitz, Mary O'Gorman. Everybody all stand, let's give them all a big round. Job is the one who is in office at any given time, and right now there is so much to do, but we are in great hands with our current president, Professor Beth Schneider.
Thank you all for coming this afternoon. I want to thank all the past presidents for organizing this event on behalf of all of you and the current board. And I just want to introduce the current board, and let's do the one flat business for the current board as well. So here they are. Esther Aguilera, Lucelia Curiel, Jane Gray, Elsa Granados, Carol Cater, Lisa Gurvitz, Arthur Hammond, Sharon Hoshida, Jacqueline Inda, Karina Jew, Mary Rose, Kate Salisbury, Olivia Urabe, Sylvia Urabe, and Nancy Wall. And you will all just stand for 1 second so we can all do.
Okay, and now we're going to do the same thing with our electeds, if we can do that, okay? Because then the day moves fast. And they know we love them, and we do. And we are honored and privileged to have these people working with us. I think we endorsed them all. just coincidentally, for those of you thinking about the power of this organization and joining. But we're going to start one big clap, and I'm going to ask the electeds, rather than jump up and sit down and all that, just once your name is called, will you stand? I'll try to get through it fast enough so that you don't feel this is exercise class. That's not a bad thing either. So let's start with our Congresswoman, Lois Capps. All right, unfortunately, Salute, you come next. Salute asked that I introduce him 5 times, but I don't need to because I saw him working the room. So Salute, one clap or you can do that. Salute Janet Wolf, Margaret Cano, Representative Assemblymember Das William, Jeanette Sanchez, Susan Deacon, Ed Easton, Rosie Farr, Lisa Gurvitz, Pam Kingsley, Paula Perotti, Colleen Schneider, Grant House, Joyce Dudley, Lauren Hanson, Susan Epstein, if you're all rise and sing up for president. Formers. Susan Rose and I decided we were going to identify the formers. So again, one clap, and then we'll all take our long overdue appreciation as formers. Starting with former Supervisor Susan Rose, former Mayor Sheila Lodge, me, Gail Marshall, Joyce Howerton, Elizabeth Owen. Thank you all. About the organization, and we're already running late. What else is new? Again, I mentioned that we had won 15 out of 15 races. That's not a bad record, and if the Gaucho women had shot that many of their free throws last night, they would have won. But I'm not bitter. Free throw, that's why they call it a free throw. Okay. What we do here is not only do we work hard to get women elected, but we also try to identify women who have leadership desires and skills. And this organization right now is currently seeking to identify anyone who would like to be more proactive in the community. We offer mentoring, leadership skills, assistance with applications to boards and commissions, and we want you. We need you. This community, every community. You know, look who's back running things right now in the House. We lost our great woman leader, and the place has gone to hell, right? I mean, you know, it really needs a good cleanup, and leave it to a woman to clean. So we need to do that. We need more women here in the community. And recently, the organization got that. Thank you. Somebody got that. We recently updated our position papers and added a few new ones. They are all available in English and Spanish on our new website that just went out this morning. Talk about a deadline. Isn't it amazing how we get things done? We need to. So please feel free to go to our website, which is SB. It's on the table. All right, for those who don't want to read, I think it's sbwpc.org.
Yes.
sbwpc.org. You know, the world is really moving to the internet, so those of us who've been resistant for a long time, give up and give in. And let's make sure we keep in touch on the internet. It's a way to activate activities. In fact, I want to announce right now that there is going to be, following today's luncheon, a press conference to speak out against the assault on women's health care. It will be in the Santa Rosa room, and we would like as many of you who can stay to participate and demonstrate our strength and the fact that we really are kind of pissed off because of the attempts that are being made to take away women's reproductive choice. In that event this afternoon, our Congresswoman Lois Capps will be there, Kathy Spiller, Cheryl Rawlings, and Beth Schneider. They're going to speak about the House's proposal to defund Planned Parenthood and our National Family Planning Program, Title X. we've got to make it clear, we ain't gonna let that happen. So if you can join us there this afternoon, immediately following today's event, that would be wonderful. And we also want to recommend too, if you like this organization, please sign up and join us. You know, when we talk to people, or we do our endorsements, we say this is a group of over X women and men committed to our values. It really makes a difference in this town. So I would urge you to do that. And I've got a couple other announcements, but I'll let you finish your lunch now, and there will be a test at the end of the day to make sure you are listening. But in the meantime, I'm going to ask former supervisor of the second district. You got to remember these things as a recovering politician. It's very important. Former second district supervisor Susan Rose, who will introduce our speaker. I'm glad this is working.
Welcome everybody also. My role is to present our guest today, but I would like to take an opportunity also to introduce, it was my plan to introduce the WPC to Kathy, but I think she's met the WPC today in full force. Kathy got here at 11 o'clock, had time to meet with some of the past presidents, and I have been bending her ear over the years about what we do up here, how remarkable we are. I think she's seen that today. And where women in public office are the norm. And I actually heard that one day from a very conservative council member in Carpinteria. He said it's not about gender, it's about issues and policy. So Kathy, you can see today that we've been doing pretty well for the last 22 years. I'm very, very proud of it. So I am delighted to introduce to you all Kathy Spiller, who is the Executive Vice President of the Feminist Majority Foundation and the Feminist Majority, a national organization working for women's equality, empowerment, and nonviolence. One of the founders, Kathy has been a driving force in executing the organization's diverse programs, securing women's rights since its inception. A specialist in community organizing, Kathy is also a trained economist and researcher, and I'm sure that's been important for you over the years. Kathy has been a national leader in the struggle to counter the effects of extremist anti-abortion groups that target women's reproductive health clinics and to bring extremists to justice. She has directed the Feminist Majority's research and public education activities, law enforcement relations, as well as grassroots organizing in some 26 states to keep clinics open in the face of extremist violence. Kathy is an expert on anti-abortion terrorism. She played an instrumental role in the Feminist Majority's landmark 1994 Supreme Court case upholding the use of buffer zones to protect clinics, and continues to oversee the Foundation's litigation efforts to stop violence. I have always been an admirer of the Feminist Majority, Kathy, because I think they take on very challenging issues that sometimes other organizations will not take up, issues both domestically and internationally. Other issues and programs that they work on are to stop gender apartheid in Afghanistan. They have a National Center for Women in Policing and a gender balance campaign that is to elect women in office, something dear to all of our hearts here today. And right now they're looking at the definition of rape, which is under discussion in Washington, and they're paying attention to that one also. In 2005, Kathy Spiller was named executive editor of Ms. Magazine. Under her oversight, Ms. has increased its investigative reporting with cover stories exposing sweatshops, forced prostitution, and forced abortions in the U.S. territory of the Mariana Islands. 1 year after the vicious murder of abortion provider Dr. George Tiller, Ms. released a groundbreaking investigation exposing the connections between Tiller's convicted murderer, Scott Roeder, and anti-abortion extremists who promote violence. Kathy oversaw the 9-month investigation, providing investigative support and research for this article. And I would suspect that many of you here in this room, like myself, have been reading Ms. Magazine for years. So I want to thank Kathy. When we asked her if she would bring some, she arrived with 200. And those of you who found them on your seat with our favorite Nancy Pelosi, we thank you for doing that. I have two really wonderful personal memories of Ms. Kathy. One is many years ago, the non-sexist children's stories. I used to read them to my 2 little girls who are in their 40s now. And the other one is the story about the clique. I don't know how many of you remember that. The clique was that moment when something happened in your life and you knew you were a member. And to this day, it's referred to as the clique. You should run that story again. So, just to conclude here, Kathy has a long history of political activism, as we know, in LA and nationally. She represents many past successes, but continues to be a fighter for the future in a battle that never seems to end. For the last 23 years, during its political activities here in this community, the Santa Barbara Women's Political Committee has proudly used the F word. By that, we mean feminism. Our motto is access, voice, and power. Kathy is the embodiment of that feminist spirit. Please join me, everybody, in welcoming Kathy.
Oh my God, thank you so much, Susan. And I'm thrilled to be here. Everybody's been saying, oh, we're so glad you would come up from Los Angeles. I keep saying, are you kidding? I mean, it's gorgeous up here. And what a crowd and what a great group. I've always admired the work that the Women's Political Committee of Santa Barbara has done. I've worked many different times with your leadership over the years. I think that the model that you've developed here is just fabulous. They're waving at you. Okay. So I'm going to, does that work? Can you hear now? Can you hear? Okay. I have a few minutes, all right. And Congresswoman Lois Capps, I'm honored you would be here today, and we're such fans. You do such wonderful work. And I'm glad to be here at this moment in history, at this time. I do think that this is our time. And I think the turnout today shows that people understand what's ahead of us and the fight that we must wage. And I think that these are both, the best of times and the worst of times in some ways. But I'm encouraged, and I hope that we can strategize together not only how to keep moving forward in this period of a more hostile political climate, but that we can strategize together how feminists are going to gain more political power in this country and support our sisters in their efforts worldwide. Thank you. Let me just review where we are right now. And there's no question that the elections that we've just come through were disastrous for women. There's just no question. At the federal level, 44 pro-choice members of the House, pro-women's rights, pro-abortion rights members of the House, were replaced by anti-abortion members. That was a very, very big loss. And in the Senate, 7 pro-abortion rights seats were replaced by strong, vehement anti-abortion members. We lost, of course, the best leadership that this Congress has ever had with Nancy Pelosi, and wanted to, by the way, if you haven't looked at your copy of Ms. Magazine, feature the woman that neither Time or Newsweek would put on their covers as the best speaker ever. And I think that it will go down in history, and it won't just be Ms. Magazine that says it already. Political analysts from the right, from the center, and from the left are declaring her tenure as the speaker as the most successful in the history of the United States Congress. And we should celebrate. Unfortunately, Nancy Pelosi was replaced by a leadership in the House that is 100% strong anti-abortion, anti-women's rights. At the state level, we had some major turnover in who controlled the state legislatures and who controlled the governor's mansions. Before the elections, Democrats held 53 of the 88 chambers, that's counting both the House or Assembly side and the Senate side of our state legislatures. After the elections, Republicans had won 52 of those, Democrats had only won 32. There are a couple of chambers where there's equal numbers of Republicans and Democrats, so it's a tie situation. In governor's mansions, Republicans picked up 11 governor seats, Democrats only picked up 5. In terms of women's representation in political office, we essentially saw for the first time a total stalling out of women's gains in the Congress. In fact, we went down by one woman in the United States Congress, so we're stuck at 16.5% to 17% of the House and the Senate are women. And in the state legislatures, we've also stalled out by and large, around 23-24%. And as we've seen in just the last 2 months, our opponents have wasted no time in attacking women's rights, especially in the area of abortion rights and family planning. They quickly introduced a number of bills in Congress and in the state legislatures that pose extreme dangers to our right to reproductive health and choice. In fact, one of your members and former presidents, Barbara Lindemann, who's here today, really summed it up beautifully in your local newspaper last week in an article. So for those of you who didn't see it, I'll just quickly go through some of the highlights. The Republicans' H.R. 1, which is the continuing resolution, zeroes out Title X family planning funding across the board. This is a 40-year-old program that has historically had both Republican and Democratic support. They zeroed it out. The irony of all of that, of course, is that this family planning program has fulfilled what the Republicans say is their goal. It reduces unintended pregnancies and therefore reduces abortions. And I think it's probably the only federal program that for every dollar you spend, you actually save $4. For every dollar you spend on family planning and reproductive health care, you save $4 down the line in maternal health care costs under Medicaid and infant care costs. So it's a program that is so short-sighted and is so damaging to the future of women and girls in this country. By the way, the good news today, if you haven't seen it, is Senator Harry Reid, the majority leader in the United States Senate, has said that the Republicans' attempt to eliminate family planning and to defund Planned Parenthood is not only a big no in the Senate, it's hell no. The Republicans are proposing a 32% cut in international family planning funding and intend to zero out the United Nations, the UNFPA, the United Nations Family Planning Organization, which spends the majority of its money on maternal health, prenatal health care, and its efforts to reduce maternal death and mortality around the world. These are some of the other cuts in H.R. 1 that impact directly on women and children. They want to cut the WIC program, the Women and Children program, by $747 million. $110 million proposed cut in a teen pregnancy prevention grant program. $50 million in maternal health grants to be cut, and $1.83 billion cuts to Head Start, the Head Start program, which is not only vital to the children who get to participate in Head Start, but frankly, it's an early childhood development and child care program for poor women in this country who are working outside the home. So it hits doubly hard in that respect. And if you add all of that up, it doesn't even begin to touch the problem of federal spending and the deficit, which of course the Republicans keep saying that's the purpose of these cuts, is to get at the federal deficit. It is a ridiculous amount of money, but it means so much to the people who benefit from these programs, but does nothing to address the deficit problem. So in the guise of deficit reduction, these are really ideologically driven cuts. H.R. 3, another Republican-initiated bill, would codify the Hyde Amendment. The Hyde Amendment each year is added to the appropriations bill and restricts Medicaid funding for abortions to only cases of rape, incest, and when the life of the woman is endangered by continuing the pregnancy. This would codify it, and it was introduced by Chris Smith, an anti-abortion Republican out of New Jersey, who's one of the leaders of the Republican anti-abortion caucus. He tried to even further define rape that would qualify for abortion coverage under Medicaid as only forcible rapes. The response was so huge, he had to back off of that. The outrage among people all over the country. As we keep saying, rape is rape. And there's no difference between forcible rape and non-forcible rape. Rape is rape. And he lost that battle right out of the box. It shows you the power of our movement to be able to back off the worst of the worst. At the state level, of course, they're trying to defund health care reform, which has enormously benefited and will enormously benefit women. Everything from getting rid of the gender price rating, so that we're no longer, just because you were born female, you're going to have to pay more for health insurance. It provides mammogram coverage, all kinds of preventive health care coverage. We hope ultimately also coverage for family planning and contraception. So it's a tremendous step forward for women, and of course the Republicans have done nothing but attack health care reform since they won the majority of the House. At the state level, I won't bore you with the long list of what is happening, but only to say that abortion has been at the top of the Republican-controlled state legislature since they took over. Everything from requiring clinics that provide abortion and family planning to become ambulatory care facilities, so that in the state of Virginia, literally every clinic in that state is threatened with closure if that law is not declared unconstitutional, to the state of Texas passing a law to eliminate all abortions, no exceptions whatsoever. There have been attacks on abortion in Ohio, New Hampshire, Colorado, Florida, Pennsylvania, Nebraska, Georgia, and Virginia. And it just doesn't seem to end the extreme measures that our opponents can think of to enact into law. In South Dakota, they just passed a law to mandate that any woman seeking an abortion has to visit one of their so-called crisis pregnancy centers for consultation. These are church-sponsored anti-abortion entities who provide misinformation in an effort to coerce women from seeking abortions. They're now going to mandate that if you go to the Planned Parenthood to seek abortion counseling, you've got to also now go and get a certificate that you've been counseled at the crisis pregnancy center and then wait another 72 hours before you can procure an abortion. And then, of course, the attacks on public sector jobs, which overwhelmingly impact on women, the teachers, the social workers, the healthcare workers. Again, society will end up suffering the most with these cuts and these attacks, but also the women and their families who depend on those incomes. And then, as Susan referenced, in the wake of this election, with so many Tea Party victories and the virulent attacks on abortion and family planning by elected officials, it has further emboldened the anti-abortion extremists in this country. You probably don't read about it every day, but clinics in some 14 states are under constant attack and targeting by anti-abortion extremists who distribute wanted posters on doctors, who go to their homes and stalk them and threaten their families, who blockade clinics and make death threats to physicians. In Wichita, where 2 years ago Dr. George Tiller was brutally murdered, a woman physician has stepped forward, a family care physician, to say that she is going to open a facility to provide abortion services. And since making that announcement, has become the target of Operation Rescue and other extremists, death threats, stalking. Her landlord sued her to prevent her from providing abortion services at her family planning practice. She's undergone severe harassment and she hasn't even opened her clinic yet. We are constantly looking to urge law enforcement, the Department of Justice, states attorneys general to take more aggressive action to intervene in these extremist threats and harassment campaigns before they result in violence. And we are working with communities all across the country to mobilize to resist these extremists and their campaigns of harassment and terror. Well, you know, all of that sounds pretty bleak. And indeed, we are in, I think, a real fight for our lives over the next 2 years. But I want to offer another analysis on the elections as well. And I think an analysis that can help us figure out how we move forward from here. You know, first of all the Democratic losses in the House were not without a silver lining. They weren't. Some of the incumbent Democrats who lost and who are no longer there were no real friend of theirs. And that includes some very powerful former committee chairs who were staunchly anti-abortion and used their powerful positions to constantly stall progress on women's rights. Ike Skelton, who was head of the House Armed Services Committee, David Obey, who was head of Appropriations, by the way, single-handedly helped fund more of these crisis pregnancy centers than probably any other member of Congress while he was head of Appropriations. James Oberstar, Transportation Committee, they're gone. And it doesn't really matter in some ways who replaces them because the kind of power that was wielded by those committee chairs won't be seen again, I don't think, for some time. And what it means, too, is that their replacements, when the Democrats ultimately do take back control of the House, and Nancy Pelosi does again become the Speaker of the House, that we're going to have a far more committees will be far more supportive of women's rights. Secondly, the biggest Democratic losses were among the anti-abortion Blue Dogs. They lost more seats than any of the progressive and pro-choice members of the House. Remember that big fight on health care reform on the abortion issue? We were fighting with the Blue Dog Democrats. They did more damage during that period. And so they lost by and large 26%. 26 of the 54 members of the Blue Dog Democratic caucus lost their races. 2 of their 4 co-chairs lost their races. Well, that really tells you something. Compare that to the Progressive Caucus. Only 4 of the 84 members of the Progressive Caucus lost their races. So that means that overall, the Democratic members of the House are now more progressive, more pro-women's rights than the former Congress. In states, for example, it really, in many cases, didn't matter who held control of the state legislatures. In a state like Pennsylvania, where the Democratic head of the Assembly was an anti-abortion, powerful incumbent, does it really make any difference that he's now been replaced by an anti-abortion Republican member? So if you go state by state, in some cases, it's really only a matter of degree about how bad that state legislature has been for women. You know, South Dakota doesn't really change very much. So you've got to really take a look at that when you're analyzing the results of these races. Third, the gender gap in the 2010 elections was not only alive and well, it played a decisive role in the outcome of the elections. There were very significant gender gaps in 25 of the 26 Senate races across the country. Now, according to the Center for American Women in Politics, usually it's just a little over half of races, maybe 2/3 of races, statewide races, which is where the polling can measure the gender gap, where that emerges as a factor. 2/3 versus 25 out of 26. It was a very important factor. And in 17 of 18 of the gubernatorial races, there were major gender gaps. In 3 key Senate races, the women voters literally elected who went on to the United States Senate. If only men had been voting in Nevada, Colorado, and Washington State, it would be the Republican, anti-abortion, anti-women's rights candidate who would be in the U.S. Senate today. In Nevada, the numbers are staggering. Harry Reid is in the Senate today because 54% of women in Nevada voted for him. Only 47% of men voted for him. In Colorado, Bennett is in the Senate today because he got 56% of women's votes, but only 40% of men's votes. 16-point gender gap. And in the state of Washington, Patty Murray is back in the Senate today because 56% of women voted for her, but she only got 47% of men's votes, a 9-point gender gap. These 3 senators are there because of the gender gap and women's votes. And by the way, we fooled the Republicans. Women voters can distinguish between a pro-choice, pro-women's rights women candidate and one of theirs. Think Sharon Angle, Christine O'Donnell, and Carly Fiorina here in the state of California. We can tell the difference. Fourth, this is very important. Abortion rights and the candidate's position on abortion was decisive in a number of Senate races. In Colorado, in Delaware, in Nevada, in California, and in Washington. Those are the states where the Democratic Senate candidate made an issue out of their difference with their Republican opponent on the issue of abortion rights and family planning, campaigned on it, ran commercials on it, had grassroots pro-choice and women's rights groups involved in their campaigns. They won the election. In the 2 states where Democrats should have won, Pennsylvania and Wisconsin, neither of them would use the issue against their anti-abortion opponents, and in both of those states, the Republican who won the Senate race, they could not be more virulently anti-abortion. These are 2 of the strongest now votes in the United States Senate against abortion rights and family planning. We should not have lost those races if only the Democrats had engaged on this issue. There were several, obviously, polls conducted at the time of the election, and the Communications Consortium Media Center, many of you are probably familiar with them, ran some post-election polls. They were one of the only election polling opportunities that asked a lot of questions about family planning and abortion and where voters were and how that influenced their vote. And the news is really quite good. It shows you that even among Republicans, there is a majority support for keeping abortion legal. 58% of Republicans polled who voted in the 2010 elections, 58% are for legal abortion. 75% of independents, and among Democrats, 86%. Do not let anyone ever tell you that abortion is not a popularly supported issue and one that can make a difference in the outcome of elections. 50%, in fact, of all voters said that abortion and the candidate's position on abortion had been a key influence on how they voted. 50%. That compares to 37% saying the Tea Party had been an influence. And for all that we hear about the Tea Party, and they are driving the anti-deficit, anti-spending whole agenda of the Republicans, they had less influence in this election than where candidates were and what the public thought, the voting public thought, on the issue of abortion. I hope it puts an end to the Democratic establishment's strategy of recruiting and supporting anti-choice candidates. Fifth reason for being optimistic coming out of these elections, Again, the Communications Consortium Media Center poll, the only one I think this time around who asked the question. 2 out of 3 Democratic women voters identify as feminists. 2 out of 3. I know you think only, but if you read the popular media on feminists, you would think that it was 10%. I think it's a magnificent number. It's 2/3. And by the way, among younger women, the numbers even don't higher. This is a movement. Our movement is not only a popular movement, it is a growing movement because we have young people with us. Think of what really in the back rooms of all of the Republican strategists, what they must be thinking at this point. They've got to be worried. They're losing the young, overwhelmingly. They're losing women significantly. They're losing Hispanics over the immigration issue. New reports out about how support for Republicans keeps falling among Latino voters in this country. They are absolutely losing on every issue that we can think of. Young people are opposed to the agenda of the Republican Party, and it only keeps growing. So we really have much more to be optimistic about if we can weather this storm that we face now. One of the major problems, of course, with the 2010 elections is the whole nature of the electorate shifted, and shifted significantly. Young people did not vote in the same numbers that they did in 2008 during the presidential election. And so as the demographics of the electorate shifted older, and they were the fear-mongering of the Republicans on Medicare and Social Security, you saw a backlash. And the economy, of course, couldn't have gotten much worse. And that's what these elections were over. These elections were not about abortion or family planning or gay and lesbian rights or labor union strength or collective bargaining. None of the issues that you've seen take the forefront in the attacks. And so, yes, we do face some hard times. And I do think that we are in a very critical period in this fight that all of us are waging to keep moving forward towards full equality for women and girls in this country. And of course, in this period, for every terrible law that passes, it's going to be poor women who are going to be hurt the worst. But those poll results and the gender gap and the reasons for the gender gap should show us the way forward. And it should help us strategize as we move forward to gain more traction and to make further progress for women's rights. So we know that abortion rights is a winning issue. We have got to hold our candidates' feet to the fire, and we have got to recruit more feminists to run for office who will campaign on these issues. We've got to increase voting among young people again. And this next election is the perfect opportunity. We need to support young people's organizing efforts. The Feminist Majority has a very large college campus program. We're on 530 college campuses across the United States with chapters and affiliated groups. And the activism on college campuses is amazing. It is so amazing. It is not true that young people are not apathetic. It's simply not true. And we've got to invest in young people and invest in campus organizing so that their voices are heard and they're part of this movement. We've got to make sure that women are visible in the elections and that our issues are visible in the elections. And I think that this is the time. I mean, you can see the turnout today. I think this is just indicative of how mad people are about the attacks and how anxious people are to figure out how they can plug in and support this movement to elect more women to political office and to win rights for women. I think the Republicans are overplaying their hand. I think they're creating a real backlash to their efforts. The days ahead are going to feel very dark at times. But don't think for a minute that because the Republicans are voting one way, or that a state legislature has just voted a terrible restrictive law on abortion or family planning into being, that somehow represents where people are in this country. Don't get mixed up between the actions of these elected officials, still overwhelmingly male and clearly out of touch with public opinion. Don't get mixed up and think the country is going to hell in a handbasket. It is not. It is not. The reason that we call ourselves the feminist majority is one, the polling shows that the majority of women, as early as 86, when some of the earliest polling was done, identify as feminists. And they're not mixed up about that term. They know what it means. They identify as feminists, but the problem is we're not empowered. And so from the earliest days, our programming has been aimed at empowering feminists in public office and in business and in the institutions of this country. The current leadership of this country just does not reflect the reality of our lives, and it's far from being gender balanced. The fight's going to be hard, but I think that this is our time, and I guess my one message today is not to be discouraged. There is much, much to be encouraged about, and we have real strength. Our movement is strong, and we are growing, and our influence is more and more clear, and when we can open the eyes of candidates to understand the influence, we can shape the outcome of elections. I hope that everyone here will join the Women's Political Committee here of Santa Barbara. This is a very powerful group. It has been very successful in getting more women elected, feminist women elected to public office. It's a fabulous model. I'm urging Susan and some of the others of you to come to Washington, D.C. in April 7th, 8th, and 9th. We've got some information out on the table. Our Women, Money, and Power Summit. It's to get more power for women. It's to get more of the federal budget focused on women. That's the money part. And so it's to encourage cross-fertilization of ideas. It's to bring together activists from all over the country to strategize how we move forward politically, as well as in our issues and our lobbying of Congress and the state legislatures. It's co-sponsored, by the way, this may surprise some of you, by the YWCA of the USA. So there will be YWCA leaders from all over the country, and they're bringing in some of their international leaders as well as activists from all over the country that are working on women's political empowerment and economic empowerment together in one place to strategize and work together. We also, we've got some incredible speakers lined up, including, because we cannot forget our sisters around the world who are struggling as well for equality. Shirin Ebadi, the Nobel laureate from Iran, will be joining us as a keynote speaker. So it's going to be a magnificent 3 days. We are honoring Nancy Pelosi on Thursday, April 7th as the best speaker ever at a luncheon, along with the highest ranking woman in organized labor, Liz Shuler, who's the #2 at the AFL-CIO. First time a woman has been elected to that high a position in organized labor. And you've probably seen her on television helping fight the good fight in Wisconsin and Ohio and Indiana. So I hope that some of you will consider getting on the plane and coming on into Washington, D.C. By the way, April 7th is also a national pro-choice lobby day. So NARAL, Planned Parenthood, now all the pro-choice groups are going to be there lobbying. Secondly, I hope you join Ms. Magazine. Get Ms. Magazine. If you want to stay informed, you've got to get Ms. We've got some sign-up cards. We brought you a complimentary copy today. But you need to support feminist media, because without feminist media, you might not know some of the stuff that I just said. Yeah, because mainstream media is not reporting it, and you too easily get discouraged if that's all you read. So I'm so thrilled that I could be here today. My message is not to be discouraged, that we're powerful. This struggle ahead will make us stronger. And indeed, we're already seeing some of those results in the kind of activism and enthusiasm and excitement, not only in this room, but all across the country. And I'm excited and very anxious to continue to make progress with all of you in the next few years. Thank you.
So I've got some questions here for Kathy. Let's see. What effect, if any, do you think the recall efforts being made in Wisconsin will have, both in Wisconsin and nationally?
I think it's a good sign. I do. I mean, I think it's a great way to get people involved, and I hope the Democrats there are successful. I hope the unions are successful in recalling the governor and some of these state legislators. Tens and tens of thousands of union members and their supporters, it wasn't just union members, came out in Wisconsin, brutally cold weather, day after day, week after week. I think in some ways they were gaining strength from the demonstrations that are sweeping the Middle East. I think we've got to be active. This is the time. We've got to be on the streets as well as organizing politically to make permanent change in our political institutions.
Okay, here's another interesting question. Let's talk about the presidential election in 2016 or 2012. What are the prospects for finding a formidable female candidate for president? Hillary says she won't run.
Well, we've got to start looking now, obviously. I think that it's a long way between now and 2016. I mean, it's a long way between now and 2012. I would hate to make any predictions. I think we're on the cusp. I do. I think we're going to see in our lifetimes in this room a woman president. And I hope that it's as strong a feminist as Hillary Clinton. And maybe it's going to be her. But I think I want a feminist woman to be the first one in that Oval Office, and not for the Republicans to recruit somebody that they push through. So we have our work cut out for us, but a lot can happen between now and then. And who knows? Who knows what the turn of events will be? We've got to stay engaged and involved and encouraging women who have made it to the Senate, to the governor's mansion, into state legislatures, to think seriously about taking that next step. And I think they're out there. I do think they're out there, and we've got to be there ready to jump into action when they make that decision.
Here's another interesting question, and it has to do with the process of keeping the conversation going. What role should an organization like this play in keeping that feminist agenda concept out there, rather than simply supporting women who are running for political office? Don't we need an everyday infrastructure or strategy for lobbying, for public relations, for keeping our ideas out there between elections?
Yeah, that's the hard part of all this. You got to keep it all going. We've obviously got to recruit more feminists to run for political office and work to get them elected. The wonderful thing is, the more feminist women you get elected to public office, they're there. They're out there. The press comes to them. They keep the issues alive. You don't even have to frequently ask them to do anything. They know what to do because that's who they are. That's why they ran for public office. It was to advance the agenda, the entire feminist agenda of equality and social justice. So our job is to get more of them elected and then to support them once they're in public office. But in between, we've got to be active. We have to be constantly speaking out when we're under attack. Right now, family planning is threatened to be cut off. We have got to support not only Planned Parenthood, but all the family planning clinics in this state. We've got to speak out. I think as I said, I think you saw the power that women had, and men joined us in this when they tried to narrow the definition of rape even further. The reaction was massive. Chris Smith had to back off and said, I didn't really mean that. So we can do this on family planning. This is an issue that has broad public support, over 90% public support for family planning. We've got to use this opportunity to hammer home the reality to people about what it means to elect too many anti-women's rights public officials. So this is our chance. They've handed it to us. Let's use it.
Okay, you mentioned that you're seeing a lot of activity on campuses. What can we do to get the younger voters out to the polls?
Give you my quick analysis. We need to support them and encourage them. You know that most college administrations will frequently tell college students that they cannot register and vote where they're going to school. They can only register and vote where their parents live, their permanent residence. Students are constantly, during our campaigns to get more students registered and voting, they frequently tell us that they think they're going to lose their financial aid if they register at a different address than their parents. The disinformation that goes into keeping young people from voting is when you get on the campuses and hear some of these stories, you're amazed. We've got to be there, and so many of you are involved in the college and universities in this town. You've got to be sure that the administrations are working actively to make sure students know they can register and vote where they're going to school. And if we make it easy enough by putting polling places on the campuses, these are little cities. I mean, 20,000, 30,000, 50,000 students in some of these universities. They should have multiple polling places. It should be easy to vote, not hard to vote. So we can do an awful lot to make sure that it's easy for young people to get registered and vote because there are votes.
Okay. This is the last question we'll do. I do want to say that this is being taped, and this recording will be posted on the website for friends who didn't get to hear a wonderful speaker. Is this the last question? Is the specter of women like Sarah Palin and Michelle Bachmann inspiring more women to speak up and get involved politically to offset their message? Are you seeing this happen throughout the country? Thank you.
Oh, I think so. It was an embarrassment, really, some of the women that the Republicans recruited. That's just how little they understand the gender gap and what women are voting on. The gender gap is driven because women are voting their interests. We're voting for candidates that are supporting women's rights, not just abortion and family planning, but pay equity, job opportunities, enforcement of the anti-discrimination laws, promoting publicly funded child care and early childhood development. That is what is driving the gender gap and women voters. The Republicans show how little they understand this to recruit anti-women's rights women candidates. They thought they could defeat Harry Reid by doing that. They thought they could win the Delaware seat by doing it. We showed them we can tell the difference. You can't fool us. And I think that it is inspiring. First of all, it's very maddening, and I think it does inspire us to keep working to make sure that feminist women are out there running for office and getting our votes.
Thank you.